أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters and friends. Let me first begin by commending SFU, MSA and all the MSAs that have been involved in UIAW. Any collaborative work between Muslims and people of faith is always an initiative which is worth commending, it's laudable. May Allah accept it from all the organizers involved. Ameen. So, I'm here to talk about deconstructing and demystifying Islamophobia in light of UIAW's theme of speaking truth to everyone, radical Islamic honesty. It's a lot of loaded words and a lot of words which means many different things to many different people. Before we even begin the endeavor of deconstructing or demystifying anything, we need to establish definitions, or at least perceived definitions. Because without definitions, we cannot even begin to understand or compartmentalize how a thing like Islamophobia exists and manifests within our societies. I also want to add that the reason why it's actually very important to discuss Islamophobia, because I'm confident that every single Muslim in this room has either directly or indirectly been affected by Islamophobia, or has heard or witnessed someone that they know that has experienced some level of anti-Muslim discrimination, directly, indirectly, openly, secretly, passively, openly. Someone's heard about it. You may well have even been a victim yourself. So therefore, something which affects the Muslim community at such a large scale is deserved to be discussed. And for our non-Muslim guests and brothers and sisters in humanity, there will be some uncomfortable truths that has to be discussed today. Has to be. Because from the UK, where I'm from, it's got to a stage where my sisters, my mother, my wife cannot travel safely alone after a particular time of the day. Even in areas which is predominantly Muslim or of immigrant descent, even in those areas, it's become unsafe, right? Metropolitan police statistics showed just in 2019 in London, there was a spike of 336% of anti-Muslim hate crimes. It's been proven that if your name happens to be Muhammad, Ali or Abdullah, and that you apply for the same job as John or Edward, that there is a 34% less likelihood that you'd even get invited into an interview. Even the Sun newspaper, which is like the most right-wing gutter newspaper you can get, but also happens to be one of the most popular newspapers in the UK, they carried out just this kind of friendly check, where they were ringing up for car insurance quotes. So they rang all the 3-4 big outlets, Admiral Insurance, AXA Insurance, and they basically said, hi, my name's, gave them a kind of typical English name, same age, same address, and then they rang them back up again with a Muslim name, and they realized that even the insurance quotes were higher for the Muslims. Anyway, it's got to a level, and I'm talking from the perspective of the UK, Europe, and the States. I haven't got data at hand for Canada, but from my interactions and observations, similar trends and sentiments happen to be affecting the Muslim community here as well. The Oxford Dictionary defines Islamophobia as a dislike of or prejudice against Islam or Muslims, especially as a political force. Another word which I feel is very important for us to understand its definition is phobia. Because phobia essentially is the second part which makes up Islamophobia. Now, phobia is described as an extreme or irrational fear or aversion to something. Now, the reason why understanding what phobia means is so important because we need to ascertain whether Islamophobia as we understand it, is it actually rational or is it irrational? And this is something which I'm going to address later on in my address to you all. But let me begin by asking everyone here, when do you think Islamophobia, as we widely, generally understand it, began? I had a guess you were going to probably put your hands up first.
Well, what I would say is Islamophobia started with the devil, Iblis. Right from there, you can make an argument.
Interesting. From the very beginning of mankind, from our father Adam alayhi salam. Interesting. Any other? Anyone else? Brother? Pardon?
9/11.
Interesting. 9/11. Any other suggestions as to when Islamophobia began? Brother?
I think it was social media that picked up.
Post 9/11?
Yeah, you can see.
You've already answered. Sister? Okay. So when the lack of education about Islam stopped, that's when Islamophobia began. Okay. I would argue, I'm more leaning towards the initial response, that Islamophobia, if we take it as a dislike or a prejudice against Islam or Muslims, that it predates 9/11, it predates the period of European colonialism, it predates the medieval period of the Crusades, it even predates the dawn of Islam, and it can be argued, very much so, that it was there from the beginning of mankind. From the moment Iblis, Shaitan, refused to prostrate and follow the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in prostrating to Adam alayhi salam, that this was perhaps one of the first manifestations of Islamophobia. It's also important for our non-Muslim guests to understand that when I refer to Islam in some context during my speech, I'm not necessarily talking about the message of Islam that was presented and came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because we believe all the prophets, from Prophet Adam all the way to Jesus, are also our prophets. And they too came with the message of Islam and pure monotheism. So I use it interchangeably. If we look at the stories of the most prominent prophets, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon them all, in the Quran and the Sunnah, we see quite clearly they all faced some levels, different levels of Islamophobia. Nuh alayhi salam, Prophet Noah, he gave dawah to his people. He conveyed the message of monotheism, being good, being truthful, being just, to his people for 950 years. Yet he barely had a handful of followers who joined him in the ship when the floods came to his people. And when he came as a warner to his people, what did they say to him? They mocked him, they belittled him, they made fun of him. And it wasn't just the lay people, it was the most powerful people in Noah's society that mocked him and belittled him and isolated him to the degree where his dawah for 950 years didn't have material numbers as one would expect. If we look at the example of Hud alayhi salam, when he came to the people of Ad, the people of Ad were a mighty civilization, mighty. Some of the scholars said that they had giant type attributes in how tall and powerful they were. A phenomenal civilization, the people of Ad were. And what did they say to Hud alayhi salam? Again, mockery, belittlement, challenging the prophets, saying, bring forth the punishment, bring forth the proofs of your Lord. Right? What happened to them? They were entirely decimated and annihilated from the face of the earth, but there is no proof of existence of them. If we look at Prophet Saleh alayhi salam and Thamud, for those of you who have been to Jordan, if you've been to Petra, these were a people who too were very powerful. They were so arrogant, they thought that by carving houses and palaces within mountain valleys would protect them from the punishment of Allah. And what did they do? When Saleh alayhi salam told them, calm down, be just, be good, worship God alone. Do not be arrogant in the blessings that Allah has given you. Mockery, belittlement, threats, they were destroyed. Lut alayhi salam, Prophet Lot, when he came to the people of Sodom, when he told them to stop their sexual deviancy and their sexual crimes, and to stop attacking travelers and traders who were passing through the town. This was a prophet who offered his own daughters to the menfolk of Sodom. How did they respond? They threatened him. They said they were going to kill him, and that they don't need him, they were going to exile him. Again, were they the lay people? No. These were the echelons of power of Sodom. They too were destroyed. And we see these kind of similar examples concurrent and consistent within the Quran and the Sunnah. Shuaib alayhi salam, the people of Madian were economically affluent. They used to have oppressive taxation to traders and travelers. They used to cheat in the marketplaces, even after the abundance of wealth that Allah blessed them with. When Shuaib alayhi salam came to them and said, look, stop this. Look how much blessings God's given you. Stop oppressing the people. Stop taxing people excessively. They didn't listen. Prophet Moses, when he came to Pharaoh, who was regarded as the biggest tyrant in humanity in the Abrahamic faiths. When Musa alayhi salam came with the proofs and the punishments of Allah, Fir'aun was still arrogant. He regarded himself to be God. Can we say that Pharaoh was a layman? That he was an everyday man? That he was just someone of no prominence and no significance? No. He was regarded as one of the most powerful men on earth during his time. And then we come to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a man who was regarded as the most trustworthy person amongst his people, to the extent that when he told his people and told them to gather and said that if I told you that there was an invading army behind me, behind the valleys, would you believe me? And they all testified to his honesty and said, yes, you are Muhammad, you are the most truthful, of course we'll believe you. Even then, what was the 13 years of Makkah like for the Prophet? Mockery, rejection, lies spread by the leaders of Quraysh, who called him a madman, a soothsayer, a person gone crazy from the whispers of shaitan, someone who splits families, turns son against father, mother against daughter. This is how the Prophet was described. He himself and his followers were persecuted. Sumayya radiallahu anha, the first martyr of Islam, a woman, she was persecuted for believing in La ilaha illallah. And there were many other companions who were tortured. The Prophet himself, his tribe were boycotted, eventually exiled, assassins sent after him. And then, of course, even wars in the early Medina period. The reason why I'm cited these prophetic examples to you all today is because it's important as Muslims to understand that Islamophobia, as we understand it and as we see it, is not a new phenomenon. It's not. It's very old. As one brother suggested, it's been there from the start of mankind. And we've seen consistent examples within the Quran and the Sunnah that all the prophets have experienced a level of hostility, aggression and hardship because they came down with a particular message, the message of monotheism, the belief in one God and associating and attributing no powers with him in worship, and all the things which emanate from this belief. Staying on the theme of historical Islamophobia, after the dawn of Islam, even during the early interactions between the Christian world, the Byzantines and the Muslims, it was very common to see in the letters and the documentation and, subhanAllah, I forgot the word, but in literature that the Christians used to very commonly refer to the Muslims as goat herders and desert dwellers and camel urine drinkers. Something which was quite common. This is the way that the Byzantines and the Christians at that time used to refer to Muslims as, in a derogatory and a dehumanized way. If you look at the medieval period, there is a letter right now, as we speak, there's a letter which is preserved in a museum in Germany, authored by Pope Urban II, the most powerful man in the Christian world. And when he wrote to the different kings and queens of Europe, calling them to arms, to a religious war, to Jerusalem, he referred to the Seljuk Muslims as savages, barbarians, Satan worshippers. This is Pope Urban II, the most powerful man in the Christian world. This letter is preserved in a museum in Germany. And we see even the post-medieval period, the interactions between the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal empires, and with the European and Western counterparts, that there was a consistent level of dehumanized and derogatory language referred to describe Islam and Muslims. Even when Europe embraced the period of enlightenment, a period of reason and science, which rightfully broke the shackles and the oppression of Roman Catholicism, where they were able to approach their literature and their religious scripture with a level of nuance and contextualization in how it would benefit them in their given time, even when the period of enlightenment is something which is consistently championed, even till today. When you look at the founding father of the science of eugenics and the founding fathers of Orientalism, you will see even then in the language a very derogatory and dehumanized narrative describing not just Muslims, Turks, Arabs, Berbers, Africans, but even blacks and Aboriginal peoples. But the reason why the brother there and many others believe that Islamophobia began after 9/11 and the war on terror is mainly and perhaps because this is the lived experience of this generation of Muslims. That this is the Islamophobia that we know, we see it rightfully as a direct result of 9/11 and the war on terror. But there's also another reason why the post-9/11, post-war on terror Islamophobia is distinctly unique compared to the historical Islamophobia that I've described to you all. That's because, for the first time, there seems to be a different aspect of Islamophobia. One which is centered around three things. Number one, there seems to be a systemic and global agenda to reform normative aspects of Islam. Aspects of Islam that have consistently been there via consensus for 14 centuries. There is now a systematic and global effort to redefine things which have always been regarded as halal or haram. Right? Second, there seems to be, at least in the West, an agenda to forcibly assimilate, not integrate, there is a difference between the two, to forcibly assimilate Muslim communities to a set of secular liberal values, some or most of which goes against fundamental Islamic values. Whilst claiming to be championing a tolerant liberal society, there is an expectation for Muslims to accept things which, quite frankly, we cannot. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, the Islamophobia of today is presented from the premise and from the lens of counterterrorism. That somehow our religion, our faith, is susceptible to, prone to violence and mindless criminality. This is what makes the Islamophobia of today distinctly different to its manifestations in the past. Another difference is that previously, when there has been, if we talk about it from the dawn of Islam, let's just take it from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and for the 13 or 14 centuries that followed, when there has been Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred, there's always been Islamic civilizations or Islamic civilization or caliphates or emirates or political entities that were there to defend and counter, like for like. But the last century, there is no central Islamic authority. There is no thriving Islamic civilization. We have 57 plus secular nation states. Again, a very unique aspect of our reality today. So given that, brothers and sisters, I present to you all, and I ask you all again, based on those examples that I've just given you, the ones from the prophets, the one from the Prophet himself, medieval history up until now, can we truly say or believe that Islamophobia is entirely irrational? I would argue, no. Some aspects of Islamophobia is irrational, but a lot of it is rational and very well thought out. And let me explain to you why. Is it not interesting that the way the Oxford Dictionary and most dictionaries and books of definitions around the world include within their definition of Islamophobia dislike or prejudice against Islam or Muslims, especially as a political force? That indicates to me, like the historical examples that I've presented, that all the prophets that I've cited to you faced hostility and hardship and aggression from the most powerful people of their societies. Pharaoh was not a nobody. Abu Jahl was not a nobody. The leaders of Ad and Thamud were not nobodies. The trade leaders of Madian were not nobodies. These were somebodies. These were the most powerful people in societies. They too feared the message of their respective prophets when it came as a political and social force. When it came in the style of radical Islamic honesty. Because what comes with radical Islamic honesty, brothers and sisters, is shaking the boat, calling for change which the status quo do not like. So, even if we look at today, whether it be in the West or in the Muslim world, whenever there's talk about the Muslim majority world and those countries seeking their own political determination and destiny, whether it be the Palestinians or the Kashmiris or the Muslims of Myanmar, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, you name it, whenever there's a Muslim country that seeks to break away from the shackles of the international global order, this seems to be a massive problem. Lo and behold, you'll find a protest or a coup or an uprising or economic sanctions. Whenever there's an Islamic movement in the Muslim majority world that wins fair elections, you'll find a military coup. You'll find a witch hunt. In the Western world, if we speak about the situation of Palestine, if we talk about defending certain normative Islamic values and beliefs, if we talk about accounting our respective government's current foreign policies, you're labeled an extremist. In the UK, on the day I flew out, just this weekend, there was a leaked document that was given to the police from the Home Office in the UK. I don't know what the equivalent of the Home Office is in Canada. It's basically the institution that oversees immigration and all that. What is that body? Anyone know? What is Canada's government body which deals with immigration? Pardon? It's just called immigration. Okay, fine. So we have the Home Office, right? So the Home Office gave a piece of document, you guys can Google it right now, leaked document to the police from Home Office. And it gave the police a list of things which it says are indicators of extremism. Do you know what kind of things it included? If you believed that Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal, that's a sign of extremism. If you question the foreign policy of the UK, you're an extremist. If you believe Muslims are oppressed, you're an extremist. If you go to extracurricular religious classes outside of school, you're an extremist. This is crazy. It's absolutely crazy, right? So if we take all of this and we look at the situation and the manifestation of Islamophobia in terms of state policies, in terms of silencing dissent, in terms of shutting down debate, in societies which claim to be tolerant and liberal and open to ideas so long as you don't infringe upon each other's rights, and that this is the current reality that we're living in, can we truly say that Islamophobia is irrational? No, it's not. It's rational. Now, it can be argued that Islam, as in its holistic and comprehensive form, that if it were to manifest like it historically did, it presents an existential threat to the existing world order, civilization, whatever you want to call it. But I will counter that by saying perhaps it's not. Perhaps Islam as a holistic way of life isn't an existential threat. But I'll tell you what it is a threat to. It is a threat to the hegemony, to the monopoly, and to the capitalist world order, which has reaped the rewards of raping and looting, with wars and all kinds of madness in the economic developing world, not just the Muslim world, while certain parts of this world's population and countries prosper at the behest and at the cost of the rest of the world suffering. That is what the existential threat is. That perhaps Islam, as a comprehensive way of life, as an alternative example for mankind, presents a system which has got something better to offer. That's not necessarily an existential threat. It is an existential threat if you happen to be on top of the food chain and milking from the oppression and injustice of millions, if not billions of people. I also want to present to you that there are different types and manifestations of Islamophobia. In China, as we speak, in an area called Xinjiang, or occupied East Turkestan, there is reportedly between 1 to 3 million Uyghur and Turkic Muslims in concentration camps, or as the Chinese government would counter, re-education camps for minor criminals. Yeah? In 2020, we're talking about concentration camps, where there's organ harvesting, forced apostasy. Then you've got in India, recently, a set of laws that have come out. The National Register Citizen Law, the Citizen Amendments Act. These laws explicitly isolate and exclude Muslims from equal rights in line with Hindus, Jains, Christians, and Sikhs. That if you happen to be a Muslim from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, or Pakistan and you seek citizenship in India, you cannot. But if you're a Christian, Hindu, Jain, or Sikh, you can. Or the NRC law, currently in the state of Assam in India, which says that if you were born in Assam, right, and you have the paperwork, if you're a Muslim, it doesn't count. You're going to have to be in a detention center until they sort your case out. Yeah? Now, if you look at the language between China's justification of concentration camps, India's justification of these laws, Britain's justification of the prevent strategy, or America's definition of the justification of the Muslim travel ban, if you get all this set of laws, you'll find that the basis seems to be the same. That Muslims and a version or different versions of Islam pose a particular threat to our society, and therefore these laws are justified. This is a consistent theme. They just manifest differently. I'm sorry, but I cannot present to you all that this is irrational. I can't. But I will tell you what Islamophobia, which kind of Islamophobia is irrational. The masses who have been fed lies and distortions about our faith and our community day in, day out, newspapers, TV channels, radio stations, social media, for the best part of 2 decades, have been fed crazy lies about not only what we believe in, but what our faith stands for, what the Prophet ﷺ himself stood for. If you feed people that kind of propaganda day in, day out, there's naturally going to be a sense of hostility. Does anyone know who Joseph Goebbels is? Joseph Goebbels was Hitler's media man. He was his propaganda man. In the space of 5 years, He managed to convince the entirety of Germany, and then of course Austria, that the Jewish people posed an existential threat to German society. These people looked different, their women dressed different, their meat was different, their language was different, their religion was different, their books were different. Right? They were taking all our jobs. They were robbing us and looting us at a time of reparations. And Joseph Goebbels said, you feed the people lies long enough, they will take it as truth. Or their moral compass will not navigate properly. What he meant by that was, when you're fed a systematic campaign of lies for such a long period, you will either become complicit and start believing these things, or you just turn a blind eye to clear injustice and oppression. Right? Now, the kind of Islamophobia that is irrational is the Islamophobia where you find people who perhaps will swear at you, will verbally abuse you, may even attack you. Because when you actually sit these individuals down, they could be your non-Muslim neighbor, they could be your non-Muslim colleague, your non-Muslim peer, if you're a convert, your non-Muslim family members. And they have a right for us to convey the message of Islam to them in a manner in which is not untainted, in a manner which is not tainted. Right? I know that could be, it's a difficult task, but your neighbors, the people that you study with, if you're a convert and you have non-Muslims in your families, people who you can actually access and have reach to, you need to engage them and speak to them and deal with some of these misconceptions and lies. Because these are people that you can actually physically and actively reach out to. Yeah? I'll be honest with you, if I was someone who followed, well, I do follow news, but if I was someone who followed news, and for like 20 years, I don't know what the state is in Canada, but I'm telling you, in the UK and in France, I know in America, Muslims are making headlines on a daily basis. Daily basis. Yeah? And it's rarely good. Right? If you're fed that for 20 years, there's naturally going to be an outcome where people are going to distrust you, are going to believe falsifications about your faith, are going to see you as not entirely trustworthy, disloyal. And if we have access to individuals like this, right, and this is me talking to the MSA here, then they need to be engaged with. Because perhaps someone may not swear at you, someone may not pull your hijab off or attack you or attack your parents, but they may, those feelings and misconceptions may fester internally. They have a right for da'wah to be given and for misconceptions to be dealt with. Because ultimately, what's happened is they've just internalized the propaganda of Islamophobia. I want to give you an example from the time of the Seerah. When the Arab tribes used to come to Mecca for Hajj, the Qurayshi leaders used to get together because it was a thriving time for the tribes of Quraysh, economically, religiously, politically, and they should discuss amongst themselves. The tribes of Arabia are coming. They're going to listen to Muhammad. What are we going to say about Muhammad? What lies are we going to say about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Right? And they should spread these lies. And generally speaking, quite a lot of people just took it because they saw it as Quraysh are our leaders. If they're saying this about one of their own sons, it must be true. Until they actually engaged with the Prophet, until they actually engaged with the companions. And some of the Arab tribes used to go back to Quraysh and say, Wayhak, woe to you. How can you isolate and exclude this man? Verily, he's a man of truth. After they engaged him, after they saw how the adherents of Islam behaved. Similarly, we should be that walking, talking, breathing example to our non-Muslim brothers and sisters in humanity. I conclude by perhaps suggesting a solution. I'm not even going to say to you that there will come a time where there will be no hostility towards Islam and Muslims. I'm not going to say that. I'm not even going to present to you that there's going to come a time where, or I'm going to give you a solution where there will be no more Islamophobia in the world, right? In the same way, if you speak to Jewish communities, they will say, will there ever be a time where there'll be no anti-Semitism? No, it'll always be there. If you speak to black communities and say to them, do you ever think that anti-black racism will fully diminish and never exist? Now, we always see it there on the long run. In the same way, I do not see Islamophobia ending anytime soon, let alone it finishing in totality. Given that, one of the ways in which we as a community, individually and collectively, should seek to overcome this is by more Islam, not less. Because if we look at the lives and the examples of the prophets, they did not compromise in their message. They did not seek to appease. They did not seek to please. One could argue, oh, but we're Muslim minorities living amongst a non-Muslim majority. Okay, fine. So when Nuh alayhi salam came, what was he? He was one man amongst a nation of non-Muslims. When Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, the 13 years of Makkah, you think the Muslims were a majority? No, they were a minority. Every time the prophets came and were given the victory of Allah, they came as minorities. Can I see a show of hands? Who's from the Indian subcontinent? Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. Who's from the Arab world? From Maghreb, from Sham. Who's from Africa? Yeah? Let me tell you something. If your forefathers and your predecessors did not have courage, and they were people of fear, right? We would not be Muslim today. We wouldn't be. So how is it that we have examples in abundance, yet we make the 20th and the 21st century somehow unique? That all of a sudden the strategy to counter these things changes. No, it's the same. More Islam. One which is grounded in confidence, one which is grounded in no compromise, and one which is grounded in sincerity in the worship and belief of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Since the war on terror, we've tried and tested many things. Muslim leaders, especially in the West, we've condemned terrorism until the cows come home. We've condemned Al-Qaeda and ISIS. We've condemned everything and anything. Sometimes when the non-Muslim community don't even expect a condemnation from us, we're there on the front line condemning, right? No disrespect to the dawah organizations, may Allah bless them for their noble work, who have thought that perhaps giving samosas and laddus and roses to non-Muslims and telling them, hey man, we're not terrorists, we're cool, that somehow that's going to over. How's that worked out? How's that? From a purely data perspective, I can't comment on Canada, but from a data perspective, it's not working that great in the US, or in UK, or in France, or in Germany, or in Denmark. Yeah? So let's try radical Islamic honesty then, yeah? Let's just have a frank discussion about what's really bugging everyone, yeah? If there's aspects about Islam which you as a non-Muslim find uncomfortable, dislike, disagree with, fine. Raise it with your Muslim peers and colleagues and friends. No one expects you to leave being a Muslim after that engagement. No one even expects you to agree with certain positions. But if we're truly to be champions of a free and liberal and tolerant society, then these conversations need to be had. These conversations need to be had. I conclude with two verses of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Muslims in Surah Al-Imran, indeed we have raised you, the Muslims, the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we have raised you as the best nation from amongst mankind. Allah doesn't just stop there, He sets a caveat. Why? Because you enjoin in good, you forbid evil, and you believe in Allah. That's the condition to be the best nation as an example for mankind. That we enjoin in all that is good, not some, and we forbid all that is bad, not what's trendy, and we do it because we believe in Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Fussilat, and who is better than the one who invites to Allah, da'wah, does good deeds, and says, indeed I am of the Muslims. Allah again is telling us, invite to Islam, do good, and the reason you're doing good is because you're a Muslim. Not because you're trying to prove to society that you're not an extremist or a terrorist, because you're Muslim. So if you're helping an old lady cross the road with her shopping bags, you're doing that because your faith tells you to do so, not because it's trendy and it's a PR job. Yeah? Allah has honored us with Islam, and it's not something that we should be selfish with. And it's not even something that requires overt and constant proselytization. Just talk to your non-Muslim peers and colleagues. Don't expect them to convert. Don't expect them to agree with every theological and juristic position that we believe in. Yeah? But engagement and difficult conversations need to be had. Last time I came to Canada, I told the brothers and sisters who I had the honor of engaging with, I told them that we are living in very unique times. I am confident that future generations of Muslims that will read back, look back at this era, last 100 years or so, wallahi, they will look back at us with great envy and adoration. Because the difficulties and the struggles that we're experiencing has been like none other in Islamic history. Wallahi, even when the Mongols came and trashed and looted Baghdad, yeah, that was like when people thought, oh God, the end of Islamic civilization. No, the struggles and some of the things which we're experiencing here in the West and in the Muslim world is like no other period in Islamic history. This is not a time to be bystanders, brothers and sisters. This is a time to reap much rewards. Because they will, on the day of judgment, there will be Muslims who came before us and after us that will envy us because of our hardships and our perseverance. I would like to be one of those people. And I'm sure and confident you all would like to as well. Jazakumullah khair, may Allah bless you all. Ameen. Any mistake I made was for myself alone, and all good came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakumullah khair. You know, let's go straight into the Q&A.
All right, so we're just going to start the Q&A now. Again, we prefer if you gave us, just raise your hand and ask any questions you have. I'm going to put the code up and the website up for the anonymous questions if you guys want that.
There was someone from Quranis yesterday. He said the uncle that's sitting in the front row. Okay. Okay. Brothers and sisters, friends, colleagues, any questions? You've always got a question. Do they plant you with questions? Sister. Yes.
First of all, thank you for your talk. Really enjoyed it.
Barakallahu feek.
My question is a little wordy, but I'll get through it.
So as long as it's not a long khutbah, I'm all ears.
Okay. So you wonderfully mentioned earlier that non-Muslims have internalized the propaganda of Islamophobia, and the way for Muslims to respond to this is through da'wah, which I agree with. I argue that Muslims also internalize the propaganda of Islamophobia, and it often creates for us a double consciousness through which we make meaning of our own identities and interact with others. So how do you suggest for Muslims to respond to their own embodiments of difference, which Islamophobia propaganda has?
The sister she made a very fantastic comment, and one which I entirely agree with. She said, for those of you who didn't hear, she said, besides the fact that non-Muslims have internalized the propaganda of Islamophobia, what about those Muslims who have also internalized the same kind of rhetoric, the same kind of propaganda, and have gone even a step further and even questioned different aspects of their identity? Is this what you've essentially said?
Yes.
Yeah. So look, Muslims, especially people of color, those who are either from Africa or Asia or the Middle East, right? Non-Caucasian Muslims, who generally make up the majority, we suffer from our own insecurities and inferiority complexes. And there's many reasons for that. Many, many reasons for it, right? It's civilizational, it's as a result of European colonialism, it's a result of how we perceive ourselves from the prisms of how external powers have defined us. There's many reasons as to why Muslims themselves have internalized not just Islamophobic propaganda, but even the kind of metrics and the paradigms of colonialism, right? I don't know about, I mean, I've been in certain places where there's a desi restaurant, right? And the way they treat a white customer and a non-white customer is absolutely insane. I've seen it, and sometimes I just watch it, I'm like, this is, subhanAllah, it's crazy. And I have relatives who are taxi drivers, and I've seen the way they deal with white customers and non-white customers, and it's just become such a normal thing, and you wouldn't think anything of it. You wouldn't think anything of it. But the truth is, it is actually systematic. It's systemic. We have internalized it in such a way that we even question our own worth. That's what it is. To overcome this, sister, is if we are not aware of our own tradition, our own faith, and what that offers, not just society and mankind, but offers ourselves as a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a flag bearer of what we deem to be the divine and exclusive truth. If we don't even understand that, then you will naturally have people who will take all kinds of alien aspects to define their own identity, right? And even when I came to Canada last, I said that, look, it is not unheard of to find Muslims who identify as gay Muslim, feminist Muslim, Zionist Muslim, socialist Muslim, or this Muslim, that Muslim. People are finding all kinds of ideological attributors to define who they are, right? But that, I would humbly argue, is because they've not truly understood the essence and the beauty and the izzah, the pride and the honor of Islam, that they've not truly internalized that. Well, once you so the solution of not internalizing Islamophobia is actually internalizing Islam. How is it that we went from Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, who said in a very famous narration that Allah honored us with Islam, right? And that if we move away from Islam, paraphrase, He will dishonor us again. How is it that we've moved away from such, and for my non-Muslim colleagues and friends, we're not talking about a supremacist mindset. We're just talking about a theology, a worldview, a philosophical paradigm and basis, which we believe has all the solutions for mankind. If you speak to a purist communist, they will tell you that they believe communism has all the answers to run the best society. The same with a socialist, the same with, actually I'm not sure about an anarchist, but if you speak to a Ba'athist, if you speak to a liberal, if you speak to an ardent secularist, you speak to Christians and Jews, they will say that their theology or their worldview or their philosophy is ideally the best thing for mankind. What makes us so different? Why should we be susceptible to being labeled just because we believe what essentially every other human being believes in? That they have a set of values and beliefs which they think is the best for mankind. So as soon as we start internalizing Islam and understanding its true potential in terms of what it offers not just society, but offers ourselves as individuals, then we will not have suffer from these kind of inferiority complexes. And I also just want to add before I take the next question, is that to convey and articulate and defend Islam, if you, brothers and sisters, are not in a position to do that, then you can end up causing more harm than good. So there's a prerequisite for those who engage in the work of the prophets, because that's what it is. And by the way, by da'wah, I don't just mean proselytization, trying to get non-Muslims to become Muslims. No. Da'wah also means standing up for just causes, against oppression. And by just causes, that means justice that's defined by the Quran and Sunnah, not justice by social justice warriors or the progressive left, etc. Yeah? Or what's trendy and what's not. Yeah? If we are not spiritually and mentally prepared, ready to do this work, then quite frankly, it's a worrying future. Every single one of you are gatekeepers and flag bearers of this deen. If you're not ready and prepared, then how do you expect others in society to respond to your call? Next question. Sister.
That concept as well.
Barakallahu feek.
I'll give an example, then I'll follow up with the question. So, those of you who don't know, there's like this YouTuber, right, her name was Laura Southern.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she went, I think it was like last year, 2 years ago, she went to the UK and she handed out flyers that were insulting.
Yes, she visited the UK and she went to Speaker's Corner and did all kinds of shenanigans, yeah.
Yeah, and she was handing out these flyers, and obviously to us as Muslims, like, it's completely unacceptable, but to the general public, it's fine, because it's humorous, and they're like insults of Allah. And so she got expelled from the UK, I believe, and she.
Yes, I believe she was kicked out and her visit visa was revoked.
Yeah, and so there was like issues with freedom of speech, and like there's like issues with fascism going on. So I guess my question is, to what extent should we, if we come across that, and like, how do we embrace freedom of speech, or should we even embrace freedom of speech while without compromising our own values?
Jazakallah khair, a very important and relevant question and comment you've made. Let's be frank about something first and foremost. Freedom of speech, as understood even by the founding fathers of liberalism and even the modern manifestation in Western liberal democracies, is not absolute. Because if freedom of speech was absolute, we wouldn't have defamation laws, and libel laws, and hate speech laws, right? So, freedom of speech is not absolute. Let's get that out of the way first, yeah? Secondly, as Muslims, we need to be very confident that we were perhaps one of the first civilizations to champion open debate. Yes. Wallahi, if you look at Baghdad in the 750s, or it's Muslim Spain, and the kind of open dialogue Christians, Jews, Greek philosophers and Muslims used to have, it was unheard of anywhere else in the world. At a time where Europe wasn't even willing to translate the Bible from Latin to their respective languages. So no one tells Muslims that we are not open to debate and scrutiny. We're absolutely open to debate and scrutiny. Done in a manner in which is respectful, done in a manner in which we can mutually benefit and try to establish the truth. That's the only caveat and condition that I would give to brothers and sisters when it comes to, if someone insults the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether they question his prophetic legitimacy, whether they question his marriage to Aisha radiallahu anha, whether they question some of his foreign policy decisions when it came to wars with certain tribes, whatever it may be, if those contentions are presented in an academic and respectful way, we should not be shy away to engage in those discussions. If you can't engage in those discussions, then that's an onus on you to now go and seek the relevant education and knowledge to now counter it. In fact, some scholars would say it's wajib upon you. If a non-Muslim has come to you with a contention and you're unable to deal with that, either you refer them to the right people or you need to go seek the knowledge to deal with that. We have no problem with criticisms. We have no problems with atheists questioning the existence of God. We have no question with Christians questioning the prophetic legitimacy of the Prophet. We have no problems with these things. Right? Why is it that many of the Enlightenment philosophers champion Al-Ghazal? Who was Al-Ghazal? Imam Ghazali rahimahullah. Why is it that many of the enlightened thinkers used to champion many of the medieval Islamic thinkers? Because we created civilizations where there were open and robust debates. Right? At a time where even if you question the concept of serfdom and the divine right of kings would get you killed and lynched in Europe. Yeah? So sister, just to respond to your question, sorry I went on a bit of a tangent. There is no such thing as an absolute freedom of speech. And another aspect of Islamophobia and its modern manifestations is how freedom of speech is selectively defined to favor certain communities and to discriminate against others. And let me tell you one more thing on this issue of freedom of speech. Do you know that when this concept of freedom of speech was born in Europe during the Enlightenment period, it was always to favor the discriminated against the most powerful? That is what freedom of speech was essentially born to do. It was to give the freedom of those who did not have those freedoms to speak their minds against the tyranny of the powerful. How is it that we're now living at a time where freedom of speech protects the powerful and discriminates against the most weakest in society? That's not freedom of speech. Some of the founding fathers of liberalism would be turning in their grave. Freedom of speech is not absolute. If that was the case, we wouldn't have certain laws in place like defamation, hate speech, yada, yada, yada. And as Muslims, we need to be confident in our tradition, we need to be confident in our theology. We are not shying away from debate and discussion, so as long as it's respectful and discuss how you would expect to be discussed, right? As for if you face an incident where someone has gone beyond those parameters of respectability by mocking, by defaming, by insulting, I don't know how I would deal with it, to be honest. I may ignore it. I may see whether if engagement is worth it or not, or ignore it. And do not be shy away from making the dua that, Ya Allah, guide them or break their backs, quite frankly. It's the truth. Ya Allah, guide them to Islam or destroy them for the madness that they're doing. Because that is not the kind of I'm not shying away from that, quite frankly. It's a contextual decision given that particular circumstance. If you think that it's worth engaging with someone who's being hostile and openly mocking, if you feel that there is some fruits to bear from this discussion, by all means do it. You may have to ignore it. You may even have to leave because it may not be safe for you, right? Especially for our sisters. So that's the decision that you'll have to make circumstantially given whatever situation that you're in. Yeah?
So one of the questions states, how should Muslims get more involved in media involvement?
If I can just have a sip of...
Can I just expand about my question? It only said 250 characters, I think for 2 months.
Okay.
Essentially what I was trying to get at is you said, just one-on-one conversations they're great, we should continue to do that.
Absolutely.
But what I've realized from my personal experience with media involvement is that the way Islamophobia is kind of being spread, or whether you want to say anti-Muslim sentiment, it is being spread primarily through the media. And what you're seeing today, whether it's in the UK, America, or Canada, is a lack of Muslim involvement in media. To the point that once you actually go on media, you're considered which is very unfortunate. So my question is, and I've asked you this before, but I was wondering if you could expand on this, is how should we get more involved with this? And like yourself, should we create our own media outlets? And how can we go about by doing this?
I can see that why you couldn't fit into 250 characters.
2,500.
Was it 2,500? Is that what you needed? Did anyone here attend the media training I delivered at BC when I came last? This was 1, 2, a few did, yeah? So one of the things I presented, I even spoke about the concept of free press, like free speech. Do you have any students of philosophy here? Right? So you guys should be aware of the kind of founding principles of the Enlightenment and some of the radical progress that was made in Europe. And free press was another one of those things. And again, free press, like free speech, was something that was initially designed to favor the oppressed and the masses, who for centuries were under the oppression of Roman Catholicism and the papacy, right? But centuries later, we find media moguls and media tycoons and media industries now favoring, and instead of being a watchdog to governments and people in authority, it's now essentially just peddling and parroting what governments and establishments want them to say. So that's an important context that was important. Now, with regards to engaging the media, absolutely Muslims need to engage with the media, but we can't have a blasé approach to this. As you attended my training last time, you can't just think, oh, ABC, NBC, whoever it may be, have contacted, boom, I need to now get on there and say what I need to say. No, there's a strategy as to you assessing what engagement is worth doing and which is not. Just to shorten it, you have to make consultation and make shura. You have to understand the context in which why a Muslim or an institution has been invited onto the media. But most definitely Muslims should engage with the media. It should be strategic. It should be a collective decision. And again, one that should be done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the defense of Islam and Muslims, and to do away with misconceptions amongst the non-Muslims within society, not for your own ego, not for your own reputation, not for your own career. Yeah? So that would be my advice. With regards to creating your own Muslim media, I am a believer that some of the greatest changes in society, at least in the last 120 years, have nearly always happened outside of the status quo and what's regarded as the system. Let me just cite you some example. The women's emancipation movement in England was succeeded not by engaging the status quo, it was by taking some very radical steps. The Indian independence was not done by engaging the British, it was done by boycotting the British. When the South African apartheid movement, Nelson Mandela, who was labeled a terrorist by all the Western government, then had statues popping up all of a sudden afterwards. That was not done by engaging the system. What was known as the Arab Spring, irrelevant of its failures or its successes, happened outside of the system. So some of the most greatest social changes that in the last 120 years have taken place outside of what's known as the mainstream or the system. I'm not saying that fruitful and meaningful changes can't take place within the status quo or within mainstream systems. What I'm saying is that history is a testimony to the fact that real change, one that can be measurable and has had lasting effects, has really always happened outside of the system. This is why, as a young, naive journalist, qualified at the age of 21, 22, for the best part of 3-4 years, I only wanted to work for BBC, Sky, okay, maybe Al Jazeera, yeah? And then I realized, you know what was happening? Every time I would pitch an idea for a news piece, or every time I would pitch something which I felt would be a good representation of grassroots Muslim views, it would either be heavily edited or it'll just be rejected, right? And I have many colleagues, many of whom are older than me. I love them, I respect them as journalists. But even when we're having a chin wag and we're catching up, they say, bro, glass ceiling. There's only limited as to how much change we can do. But in their perspective, from their pragmatic approach, they see it as, well, if I can produce one documentary or one 3-minute news piece that will go out on BBC, on Sky, on Vice, and it reaches X amount of people, I've done what I could do, perhaps not to the extent and the quality which I had to. Whereas myself, I decided at the age of 25, 26, when I launched 5 Pillars News, that, quite frankly, there is nothing out there that's truly a representative voice for the Muslim community, as well as conveying to non-Muslims why we believe the things that we believe, right? Can you believe that North America does not even have a Muslim media website? You don't. I think the only thing you have is this magazine in America, Muslim Girl or something, yeah? No, I'm being serious, nothing else exists. Or Muslim Matters. Muslim Matters really isn't even a news website. That there isn't even a Muslim media outlet that you guys have. Do you have a national one? So really, when you're up against a multi-billionaire, multi-trillion industry, there needs to come a time where you just have to fight back, not for like, because that can never be the case, but at least by presenting your own narrative. At least with your own outlets, there's a level of independence, there's a level of control with regards to what can be said, what can't be said, and how it should be said. I will never discourage anyone from pursuing careers in the mainstream media. I'll just give you a heads up. Now, what you think you're going to do is not going to happen unless you make some serious compromises in your Islamic values and beliefs. Next question, if there is any.
Excuse me. Just wanted to share my views with you.
Is this the uncle from yesterday?
If you allow me to.
Well, uncle, it depends. If it's relevant to the topic, I will take it.
Sorry?
If it's relevant to the topic, I will take your question.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
On this particular topic, just a couple of observations and then you could perhaps give your comments.
Will you keep it short?
I think the problem really lies
Yes.
with Muslims not being united, not being Quran. They're divided into sects.
Agreed.
And when you divide into sects, which makes you effectively commit shirk. And when you become sectarians and you are not walking Qurans, then you are munafiq as well, in hypocrites in Quranic terms. So, having said that, if you look at values of Quran, whoever lives the values of Quran excels, and whoever says that they are Muslims and they are worse in their everything you could assume on them. A Muslim country is being a Muslim, you've got to get back to your source. And if you are united and if you're walking Qurans, would anybody dare to sort of even look at you? Otherwise, they will always persecute Muslims if they have an opportunity. As all messengers, Quran tells us that it's hard for people to sort of truth. And there's a satanic clause which come up. Like it's extremism is in every sort of so-called religion. KKR is was example in Christianity. RSS is in Hinduism. And now you see Buddhist, whatever is going on in Myanmar. So to single out the extremists out of Islam is one thing. But having said that, instead of a problem, sort of gives an opportunity.
Yes.
Challenge is always an opportunity.
Yes.
So opportunity is that if we.
So what's the question?
No. The uncle, if I may. No, and those. No, you. خلاص. The uncle made some very good observations. The uncle, you made some very good observations, and one which I'm finding difficult to disagree with.
I think you can take up.
No, of course. Look, no. Jazakallah khair for your comment. If we can take anything what the uncle said, he made two undeniably truthful observations. If someone was to ask me, Dilly, conclude very shortly what is the problem and the state of the ummah? It is leadership and disunity. So our uncle is correct in that regard. And if as an ummah we return to the Quranic values, then I don't think we can go wrong. I think that what's happened is that when you move away from Quranic and prophetic values and teachings and beliefs, that we find ourselves in the situation that we do. So Jazakallah khair, uncle, for that very correct observation, that indeed disunity and sectarianism and partisanship is indeed one of a major, if not the most major obstacle in our situation as an ummah today. Brother.
Sorry, I wasn't here for the entire thing. I was just curious to know that me as a growing Muslim, I don't think I'll ever become the picture of the best Muslim or actually.
You can at least aspire to be.
Everyone is Muslim, and we just become more and more. But one thing for myself, if I'm looking for knowledge,
Yeah.
and like you said, there's a your news media that you created. And I'm not saying that it's wrong, but how do I know that you're right? And how do I make sure that other medias, be they Islam-oriented, or be it CNN or Fox or whatever, like they're not selling everything that's fake news.
Of course.
How do I make sure I get the best answer?
Okay, that's a very good question. Look, Muslims are no different to other human beings in society. We are susceptible to, and our views and our perceptions and our opinions are shaped by many, many things. Whether it be internally as a Muslim, so you get different strands of Muslim. You get the 4 schools of jurisprudence, you get the 3 schools of creed, you get even political movements, you get Salafi, Sufi, Deobandi, Brelvi, Ikhwani, you get all kinds of strands, Sunni, Shia, all these kind of things, So naturally these things will shape, like if we take the conflict in Syria, for example, Sunnis see that conflict very different to how Shias see that conflict. Same with Yemen, so these things will have naturally an influence in how you take, interpret, and understand news. I don't think BBC or Sky feed us fake news around the clock, not at all. I think BBC is perhaps one of the most sophisticated, if not the most sophisticated media outlet in the world, right? In that even when they do peddle propaganda, you can't even really tell, to be honest. Now, with regards to how do you know what's right and wrong, that's fundamentally boils down to your moral compass and your understanding of the deen and your understanding of what's right and wrong, right? Now, inshallah, if that's in place or if that's a work in progress, then you can ascertain what news is truth and what news is fake news, right? And that's the only thing I can say, bro. Because there's so many external and internal influences that we have, right? Let's take the Kashmir conflict, for example. How a Pakistani Muslim and an Indian Muslim sees that conflict is different, right? The war of 1971 between Bangladesh and Pakistan. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be citing examples from the subcontinent. It's just natural because my origins are from there. So if you look at the war of 1971, if you speak to a Bengali and how they interpret that war to how Pakistani, it's completely different. Do you understand? Yeah, and we can cite of so many examples. Yeah. So the way you interpret and understand and take news will fundamentally boil down to the different things which influence your morality, inshallah. Yeah. Now, if you have an Islamic moral compass, generally speaking, inshallah, and by the way, my non-Muslim friends and peers and brothers and sisters, I'm not saying that if you are non-Muslim that your moral compass isn't correct. Well, we would say that it isn't correct, entirely correct, but it can be correct also. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you have Islam and you've internalized it correctly with the right tarbiyah and the upbringing of your parents and your own pursuit for knowledge and truth, then you should be able to make a judgment call on what's regarded as good, bad, or ugly news. Now, with regards to news, if you guys are wondering where can we get source of alternative Muslim news, of course, check out 5pillarsuk.com. We're on socials. There's Ilmfeed, there's One Path Network, there's Islam 21C, there's Doam, and of course, I would never say listen to one news outlet and not the other. I would in fact encourage everyone to read and follow and watch as many news outlets as possible, because at least you'd have a more well-rounded approach to understanding current affairs, and more importantly, how different states and different institutions that fall in the spectrum of political ideologies interpret current affairs. Like if you see the way, and I keep citing Syria because Syria is a prime example for our time. If you see how Russia Today covers and Press TV, an Iranian outlet, covers the Syrian conflict, and how Al Jazeera covers the Syrian conflict, it's like you think to yourself, oh, these two completely different conflicts, and that's what we're up against, and that's why our moral compass and our judgment and understanding of what's right and wrong according to Islam is important, even when it comes to taking news. Like even when I tell you guys to check out 5 Pillars, I do not expect you to agree with everything. As an editor and a founder, I actually disagree with around 65-70% of the content that we publish. I disagree with it. But then how can I claim to be an editor of an outlet which claims to be representative of the diversity of the Muslim views, but only create an echo chamber? Do you understand? So I recommend you all to watch, read, and follow as many news outlets as possible and become well versed in the way news is presented and disseminated. And naturally, it is your moral compass and your aspiration to be a good Muslim that will, inshallah, guide you to what kind of news you should take and reject. Do we have, I will take a question, Akhi. Do you have any more time? How long have we got, brother? Khalas, Akhi, question.
So my question is, when you talk about Islamophobia, you talk about Islamophobic acts, whether it's hate speech, violence, you can the way you can, a solution to that would be dialogue, right? Talking individually. But I've seen this in the schooling system, whether it's in high school, elementary schools, even universities, where there's people that understand that Muslims are not like this. Well, they'll take the labels that media puts and they'll make a joke out of it. And I'm just joking. I know you're not a terrorist, but I'm just joking. It's a joke. If they call you a terrorist,
That's joking from a position of privilege. That's what it is. That's what it is. Like to crack a terrorist for a non-Muslim or a non-person of color or a person who's not from a non-immigrant background in the West, to crack those kind of jokes, they're doing it from a position of privilege because they don't get to live that experience. They don't get to live that experience of their mothers or their sisters or their women folk having to travel unsafely. When I came to Canada this time round, I was going to bring my camera with me. Well, I did bring my camera with me. And there was a massive discussion between me and my wife. Should I check it into the main luggage or should I just walk through security with it? Yani, have you ever experienced that? I had to. There was a 20-minute discussion with my wife about whether or not I should put my camera into my luggage or not. I'm being serious. I know there's Muslim men out there that before they travel, they talk about, should we trim our beards? Should we keep it at fist length? Should we shorten it a bit? These are the lived experiences that we have. So you can crack a terrorist joke, but that's not your lived experience. You do it from a position of privilege. And they should be held account to that. Don't let it pass, even as a laughing joke. Don't embarrass your non-Muslim colleague or friend. Put them aside and say, look, I understand that you meant no harm. I don't expect you to understand. But for you to crack those jokes, that has real life experiences. For those of you who have your phones out right now, please Google the cucumber terrorism story in the UK. A kid in the UK, Muslim, yeah, he was describing a cucumber, and as a 4 or 5-year-old does, it came out as Kookaburra. He got referred to prevent officers, and his doors were kicked down, his parents were arrested. And we can laugh in hindsight, but when your door's getting booted down, you got armed response team, because a kid mispronounced cucumber as cucumber, that's not a laughing joke. I don't find that to be appropriate for a non-Muslim to crack jokes about that, right? The thing is, if that happens, respectfully tell our non-Muslim colleagues and friends and brothers and sisters in humanity, look, I appreciate you didn't mean that, but it has real life effects on me and my community. You understand? Just avoid that. In the same way that we wouldn't, I'm sure you guys have heard of the saying, too many cowboys, not enough Indians. Has anyone heard that saying? Has anyone heard that saying? Too many cowboys, not enough Indians. That basically means that we've got too many leaders and not enough followers. But what does that saying actually mean? When there's too many cowboys and not enough Indians to either rule or kill. Do you understand? So you can't let these things slide, right? Perhaps sometimes it's acceptable with your boys if you grew up in a hood with white mates or black mates or non-Muslim mates who grew up from the same socio-economic background as you and they've grew up with Muslims all their lives. That's different. Because I'm sure some Muslims give as good as they get when it comes to cracking gore jokes and white jokes and non-Muslim jokes, yeah? Let's be frank about it, yeah? So that's different to in a work environment, in an academic environment, these jokes being passed off, because they can't be. It can't be, because these are real lived experiences. Barakallahu feek, akhi. Yeah. Okay. So the brother asked that because groups like ISIS have kind of presented such a disastrous manifestation of what they understood to be Sharia, a near bastardization, quite frankly, that how do we now as mainstream Muslims defend the aspects of Sharia which are constantly under attack? Good question. First and foremost, we need to make the distinction that the Muslim Ummah in the Muslim world and in the Western world have overwhelmingly rejected groups like ISIS. Yet, can we say the same for Buddhist communities and groups? Have they came out in their droves and rejected the heinous crimes against the Rohingya? Or have we seen our brothers and sisters from the Jewish community in their droves come out and speak out against the Zionist oppression against our Palestinian brothers and sisters? Have we seen thousands, if not millions, in the UK, we've had thousands, tens of thousands of Muslims march in the streets of London against terrorism. I do not recall that happening from any other faith community. Muslims have rejected ISIS. Muslims have consistently throughout our history rejected groups that are beyond the fringe. And in fact, I believe ISIS was the perfect foreign policy outcome for Western superpowers, namely the US. The fact that the entire war on terror was premised under this collective threat presented by the Muslim world of a caliphate, which by the way is very much part of normative Sunni Islamic tradition, as the imamah is amongst the Shias. This is a normative Islamic concept. By consensus, we will defend it, we will articulate it. Just because a group like ISIS came along and committed those crimes that they did, right, does not mean it's a free pass or it becomes synonymous with you total, and by you I mean critics, detractors, etc., to now say that because of what ISIS did, caliphate in its entirety as a concept is alien, backward, and regressive, or because ISIS carried out their interpretation of certain penal codes, that all of a sudden the entire corpus of the Sharia penal code is all of a sudden illegitimate. Yeah? No, we reject that. And we, again, boils down to that if you yourself are not well equipped and educated in why things like jihad, khilafah, sharia, hudud, al-wala wal-bara, the concept of citizenship, the concept of ummah, the concept of, and all these different things which are hot topics right now. If you are not well versed in these normative concepts of our theology and our jurisprudence, then how can you expect to defend and articulate these things? I remember one of the defining moments for me. It wasn't conclusive, but it was definitely a defining moment. In my second year of studying BA Politics, I was in one of my seminars, and the module was called "The Rise of Religious Fundamentalism Post Cold War and Beyond." Right? So we discussed things like the rise of the evangelical right, the rise of the Iranian Revolution, And there was a Nigerian girl, one of my peers. She put her hand up and she said, "Oh, I came from a Muslim background, but I've left Islam. And the reason why I left Islam is because I can't believe in a faith that stones and kills apostates." Right? And I was stuck. I felt so ashamed. I was sat in a seminar and I couldn't counter that. And that every single non-Muslim peer of mine in that room left with what she uttered. And wallahi, I went back, I spoke to my local imam, the imam who taught me Salah and Quran. He didn't know as much as I thought he would. Then I looked into it, I researched, and I came back towards the end of the semester and I countered that, even when it had no relevance to the seminar topic. Wallahi, I did it. Because it had to be done. I couldn't allow it, and I wasn't even practicing then. But I couldn't allow my non-Muslim colleagues and peers, some of whom were my good friends, right, to leave with what she said. The reason why she left Islam, because Islam kills people for leaving their faith. So I went and read up about the penal code. I read up about how many instances of capital punishment took place for ridda. I did all of it. I came back, I countered the point, and I did a comparative exercise on the American Penal Code and the medieval penal code of European kingdoms. And it was contextualized and understood. So if you are not ready and prepared to do these things, how are you going to defend? Because the average non-Muslim will see ISIS as caliphate. They will. And the mainstream media done a fantastic job in making ISIS synonymous to caliphate. Right? When this was a rich institution that was left to us by our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by Khulafa al-Rashideen, maintained and preserved by 3 noble dynasties, right? One which is stipulated in the Quran, right, uncle? Allah said that if we are just and do good, He will establish us on the earth. Does He not say that in the Quran? Yes. So how can we now reject this? Because ISIS came along. Equip yourself with the relevant arguments, equip yourself with the knowledge that's relevant in your deen, and then inshallah you'll be in a position to counter these things, or find people or references to signpost your non-Muslim colleagues and friends. Brother. I'm counting, 30 seconds.
One of the things that a lot of people remember when we talk about Muslims, they think of 5 things. That's what Muslims say, is they're like, okay, I'm going to have shahada, I'm going to fast, I'm going to pray. And in the Quran, all of these 5 pillars are about like 80 pages. Okay? What is the rest of the Quran? It tells you how to treat your wife fairly, how to treat your neighbor fairly, how to do your will, and all this stuff. And yes, these ISIS members are fasting, and they're praying on time, they're always like very, mashallah, looking at their fears and stuff. But there's 600 pages in the Quran. You can't just take 80 of them and claim to be Muslim. You have to do everything. So that's one of the counts.
Absolutely. And that example actually works in all different spectrums. On the one hand, we have a very violent and criminal manifestation of those who pick and choose aspects of Islam. And then we have on the other spectrum, from a kind of very liberal woke perspective, that they too want to choose 60 or 40 or maybe even 5 pages from Quran and then create an entire framework of activism. So it works with many different spectrums of those who want to distort the faith. I'm going to stop taking questions.
I just have something related to your point. I had the same experience this Friday, which is similar to what you had, where I was in my history class, and then the professor, every single time, kept saying jihad, and kept saying also hope. And within the span of 2 minutes, he might have said jihad 5 times.
Your lecturer did that, and what is he a professor in history?
He's a professor here. And so he was talking about the Turkish theology of jihad against Germany, irrespective. But he kept saying it, and after every time he said it, he would say holy war. And I always told myself, if he says it one more time, I'm going to correct him. Then he would say it, I'm like, if he says it one more time, I'll correct him. And it went on like 5 times, and then finally he says, does anybody have any questions? Okay, this is this past Friday. And I put my hand on, I'm like, look, what does it actually mean? And then he looked at me and he's like, yeah, it doesn't mean holy war, it means struggle and all of this. And then I spent like maybe a minute explaining to the class what it is. So if even within our own university, and if you don't have that individual who's willing to speak up, then you have the entire class.
Absolutely.
Believe exactly what the
Absolutely. And Jazakallah khair, may Allah bless you for correcting your professor with that regard. I just want to add something to that, right? Even the issue of jihad fi sabilillah, it has its linguistic meaning, it has its legal meaning, and yes, in most references in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about jihad fi sabilillah, He is referring to military engagement. He is, right? And we are also not going to shy away from the fact that Islam, as a comprehensive way of life, has an element of it where it stipulates rules of engagement. How can you claim to be a comprehensive way of life and an alternative for mankind and not have a corpus of the rules of engagement? Do you understand? So we shouldn't shy away from that. And I'm glad that you mentioned and corrected that jihad as the word itself does not equate holy war. I'll tell you why that mistake exists, and I'll tell you why it exists generally in history and philosophy and religious studies. What ends up happening, right? Because of Europe's experience with Roman Catholicism between state and religion, right? Because of that experience, what you'll find that Western academia, which is the most dominant academic thingy in the world, I forgot the word, so thingy came out. Yeah. So they superimpose, knowingly, unknowingly, the founding fathers of Orientalism did this, right? That they superimpose the European Christian experience to all other faiths and all other struggles, right? I will say this, one of the greatest things to have happened to Europe was the period of Enlightenment, because the treatment of the Vatican and Roman Catholicism on the masses of Europe was truly horrific. It was crazy to think that they had a Bible which they believed was the word of God, or the word of God translated via man, or whatever they want to describe it. And that was translated in the UK. The King James Bible was like in the 17th century. What were you reading for 1600 years? A language which you could not understand, and they weren't even willing to teach the masses Latin to have access to the sacred scriptures. So Enlightenment and the period and that period, right, was good for Europeans. But that doesn't mean it was good, or that experience can be superimposed on everyone else. So that's why words such as holy war, state and religion, etc., which are absolutely applicable and understandable in the European Christian context, does not apply to us. So the thing of holy war comes from the just war theory, right? And it just simply doesn't apply, because in some contexts, jihad fi sabilillah may well be a call to arms, and it may well not be. There was a sister who wanted to ask a question.
There's a very little care or compassion when it comes to Muslims suffering around the world, but especially when it comes to specific populations such as Rohingya, such as the Uyghur population in China, whereas there's a huge emphasis in other populations which are more under their terrorism, Muslim, quote-unquote Muslim terrorism. So how, as Muslims, can we promote, or not promote, but share information about Muslim brothers and sisters who are suffering in other countries where perpetrator isn't Muslim, or doesn't claim to be Muslim.
Okay. You know what? On that note, I'm going to end today's talk. You know why, sister? I'm glad you raised that, because one of the signs or one of the manifestations of Islamophobia, which I mentioned in my talk, was to redefine normative Islamic values and beliefs. And one of the normative Islamic values and concepts that is constantly being scrutinized is the concept of ummah. Uncle, in the Quran, Allah says, Al-Muslimin al-Ikhwa, the Muslims are but one. Yes, uncle? Yes? How can we reject this? In a hadith, Prophet ﷺ said that the ummah verily is like one body. When one part of it is hurt, the rest of it responds in fever. Right? Some ulama said that there's certain conditions and situations where you could lie. One is to reconcile between two brothers. Yeah? The reason I'm saying this is because I'm so happy that you stated the issue of ummah and the issue of the oppression of Muslims elsewhere. Because there is a massive effort happening in the UK and in Europe where there has to be this excessive pride and loyalty to the nation state. That your loyalty comes to Britain first. You do not dare question the army or the foreign policy, irrelevant what they're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, or whether they're selling weapons to Israel, wherever it doesn't matter. Your loyalty first and foremost is that you're a British citizen, you're a subject of the Queen, right? We can't accept that. I am a citizen of whichever country. I had no control over which country I was born in, right? So, whilst I am a citizen of Canada, Britain, and I will do my utmost best for the prosperity of this country, as we should, by the way, we should. This is our land, this is our qawm. And we want the best for this society and our brothers and sisters in humanity as we would with anyone else. However, we must not forget that we are part of a global ummah. Now, with regards to highlighting oppressions of Muslims in different places, I've actually delivered a lecture. You can catch it on YouTube. It's called SOAS State of the Ummah. You'll find it. And there I briefly discussed, because someone asked me from the audience, Brother Dilly, why is it that Muslims focus so much on Palestine and Syria, but not what's happening in Africa or in China, right? Why do certain countries of war and oppression get preferential treatment compared to others, yeah? I'll explain why that may happen. The reason why Palestine and Syria, those two specifically, get a significant focus is because in Quran and Sunnah, Allah and His Messenger talks about Damascus and Jerusalem and Masjid al-Aqsa and the honor of these places and how holy and sacred they are to us. So naturally, there'll be an inclination towards highlighting the oppression of Palestinians and the Syrian conflict compared to others. That's what I personally observed. Yeah, Palestine more so historically because it was the first real loss of the Holy Land since the Crusades. After World War I, when the Israeli entity was illegally born, we saw Palestine being given away. That was the first loss of the Holy Lands since 1186 when Salahuddin Ayyubi rahimahullah took that. Yeah, so that was massive for us. Yeah. Another issue is that where you find many Muslims from a particular region, you will find the conflict of that particular region given more prominence. So in the UK, 70% of Muslims, there's 3 million in the UK, 70% are either from Pakistan, Bangladesh or India. So naturally, the issue of Kashmir and Myanmar will be the most highest topic of discussion, right? Along with Palestine and Syria. When there was conflict in Somalia and there were communities with high levels of Somali Muslims, naturally they will talk about Somalia. Now, because the Uyghur community are not that spread out, their diaspora communities are very small. You'll find pockets of them in Germany, some in Canada, some, because they're not so widespread, we are now just recently hearing about the Uyghur situation, right? But we shouldn't differentiate between the blood and honor of any Muslim between another. Arab, Turk, black, Asian, white. The izzah and the blood and the honor of a Muslim is one. And that the blood of the Uyghur is the same as the blood of the Palestinian, which is the same as the blood of the Kashmiri. For our non-Muslim colleagues, you must be thinking to yourself, how depressing it must be being a bloody Muslim, man. When it's not issues at home, there's issues elsewhere. Is it not a lived experience, brothers and sisters? Is it not? It's a lived experience. And it hurts. And it affects the way we behave. And it affects the way we engage with people. and it affects the way we perceive ourselves and define ourselves. So these things are very important to us. Just to conclude, the concept of ummah and unity within the Muslims, something which Uncle rightly highlighted, it is perhaps one of the most paramount things that are part of a Muslim's belief. The very fact that when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, just think about the Battle of Badr, where the son fought his father, where nephews fought uncles. Just imagine that for a moment. That is the maqam and the status of Islamic brotherhood, where it became legitimate to fight your father for truth to prevail. Right? So we shouldn't differentiate between the dishonoring, the oppression of Muslims over one area of another. But naturally it will happen because of the ethno-demographics of respective regions and areas and diaspora communities. With particularly Palestine and Syria, there is a big religious importance to it in scripture. But I'll also add to that, brothers and sisters, that we should also be advocates of oppression around the world, even amongst non-Muslims. Wallahi, we should. We cannot, their blood and honor on a level is not necessarily different either. So where they are being oppressed, whether it be in Africa or South America or Central America, wherever it may be, or even the poor and the destitute in your respective countries in the West. Allah told us, remember in the Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, that He has raised us the best nation from amongst mankind because we enjoin all that is good and forbid all that is bad. Not enjoin all that is good that is for Muslims and forbid all that is bad that's pertaining to Muslims. It's for everyone. Jazakumullah khairan, brothers and sisters. Thank you for your interaction.
Alright, we're done for the day. I'd like to personally thank Dilly Hussain for coming out to this lecture and answering all of our questions. Before you guys, somebody got to hear from Rose here. Yeah, I don't know who it is, but if you think you know who it is, or if it is just someone to talk to you, or one of your sisters. Oh yeah, so we will be having more lectures. I know there was a bunch of questions on Sharia and jihad. On Friday, the topic itself is on jihad. So